Today we're talking to Ardath Albee, a speaker and author in the content marketing world, and we're talking about B2B strategy as well as mapping your buyer personas and how that could lead to conversions. So listen in.
My name is Bryan and Nicolette from Insomnicat Media, and I'm here with Nicolette. And today we're going to talk with Ardath Albee. She's a speaker. She's written multiple books in content marketing, especially in the B2B space. Ardath, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a B2B marketing strategist, and I spend a majority of my time creating buyer personas and persona-driven content marketing strategies for B2B companies, mostly in technology, some other industries. And so I'm a storyteller at heart.
I love that. That's what I call myself too.
That's actually part of your title, Nicolette, correct?
Yes. So in your journeys then, what are you discovering in the B2B space? What are some of the challenges that these marketers are up against today? I'd really like to start with that and kind of open it up from there. And how, of course, because it's not just problem focused, but solution based. So how are they overcoming some of these challenges, if they are at all?
Right. Well, as I'm sure all of you know, content has been around now for about a decade or so, content marketing itself, and it was easier. Now it's getting harder, and buyers are also changing. Technology is changing. Everything is changing. And so what companies are finding is that they really don't understand their buyers. So they have this internal view of them, and it's really interesting. Every time I start a project, the first thing I do is interview people at the company. Who do you sell to? Who are your buyers? What does your market look like? And then we do customer interviews, and it's rare that the two really line up very well. And so, part of it is also that they're trying to do everything with one piece of content, talk to everybody. And when you do that, you end up with content that's too high level, that doesn't solve a problem for anybody. And so, those are some of the challenges. The other challenges are that I don't think marketers and B2B companies are actually natural storytellers. And so when you're really product focused, it's hard to talk about things that really matter to the buyers. And we know our products so well, we focus on that, but buyers don't care. What they care about is, how do I solve my problem? Why should I do it? What am I going to get? Those kinds of things. And we need to get better at talking about those things. But I think the other problem really is the evolution of technology. So a lot of my clients are looking for, where's that silver bullet? Where's that thing that's going to just make it all come together? I remember when marketing automation really came out, and everybody thought, well, that's great. I'll buy that. It'll automate everything, and, no problem. We'll just generate customers. Right. And unfortunately, what they discovered is if they don't have the content and messaging and story to put in the marketing automation system, that what they're automating is just a bunch of junk. So, it doesn't resonate, and it doesn't, help anybody progress towards buying. And that's really been the big challenge. So there's a lot of stuff going on that marketers are trying to tackle, and, it's a lot of times they don't have executive support because, their bosses don't understand. And one of the biggest things I fight with, or help my clients, the teams I work with, fight with, is that they're still being graded on performance in relation to how many leads did you generate, and leads in quotation marks, right? Like how many names did you get this month, and when you're really trying to engage and help buyers progress, and sometimes sales cycles are as long as a year or 2 years. I have a client that's 3 years for a sales cycle for a huge sale. And so you're not going to have a result in a month or in a quarter, and they run campaigns that are 6 weeks long and then say, well, why didn't we close any sales? Well, how long's the buying process,
Right.
But just when people get interested, they cut it off.
Right. We see that a lot. Like, people think there's the sales cycle, even though, like you're saying, sometimes it's a year. They'll run a campaign and they'll say, oh, it's unsuccessful after a month, or do you know what I mean? Or that content didn't get ranked, or we didn't generate enough leads, but they haven't really given it enough time, realistically.
Right.
And you also mentioned, Ardath, that they think that they're going to hit all of these these different personas with one piece of content. And, to that point, is that really just, are there budget, is that really because of budget constraints, or is it just lack of education? We see both. I was just wondering what you were seeing.
Well, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, who is a huge tech company in communications, and they have been traditionally product driven, and they've, come to the realization they need to develop personas, become, more customer centric and that kind of thing. And so we built personas, we're getting ready to launch a campaign, and I'm sitting in a meeting with the executive marketing team, and we're looking at segmentation. And the list comes back, and there's over 200,000 people on the list. And I said, wow, that's a big list, and so we started looking through the list, and there were all kinds of people on the list that were not the persona. And so I brought it up, and I said, guys, your response rates are historically low because your lists are so broad. When we did personas, we need to target the list, so can we cull it down? And the response from the CMO was, well, some of those people may change jobs and become our target market in the future.
That's interesting.
And I'm like, okay, so, but it's like, the way they look at it, it's like, why would we miss an opportunity to touch someone regardless of who they are? Because maybe one day they could become our customer or our buyer.
Right.
And it's a ridiculous perspective, quite frankly, in this day and age.
Right. Well, it's interesting too. And if you are going to do something like that, what's interesting too is at least then understand, we talked about, content, like CRMs, right? Knowing what's happening with those users that you're touching, at least start looking at what are they actually clicking on, and what, do you know what I mean? And then start even creating some personas out of that versus, this broad-based email.
Right. Well, and the other thing that I find interesting about this particular client also is that they tend to market to the end user when the buyer is a totally different person. So, it's because they're more interested in talking about what the end user can do with their products than the benefit it provides to the end buyer. So it's a whole different conversation. Well, for example, they're talking to business users, but the buyer is IT. So there's a whole different thing when you talk to an IT person about the role of the technology within their ecosystem, within their network, how it's going to integrate with their other tech, systems in their tech stack, et cetera, and the value that an IT person is going to get versus the value a business user gets from using the technology to produce a certain outcome. You know what I'm saying? So it's two different stories, totally. So if they're marketing to the people who aren't buying but using, well, that's fabulous. Put that in your customer marketing, but don't put it in your buyer marketing. Help people use it, help your customers adopt it and use it. That's great. But as a role in demand gen, it's pretty much useless, Yeah,
we just went through something like that with a client.
We did
tailoring the messaging right to and actually it was just the same example you used in IT. So so I'm picking up. Go ahead, Bryan. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to no finish because I was going to ask some more about the personas, but you may be going there.
Oh, so. Yes, actually, I was going to, because we're talking. As I was hoping, we were focusing a lot on the persona. So you're giving us some of like the challenges that you come across. But what is it that you consider maybe the most important thing that companies should consider when they start mapping out their buyer personas? Is there something that you always go to, most important considerations?
Well, yeah, for me, the most compelling and important component of a persona is understanding all of the questions that they would ask that they need answered in order to make progress from maybe we need to solve this problem to we need to partner with you and buy your solution to do it. You're the best choice. What are all the questions that get them there? Because once you know the things that they need to ask and have answered, you have a map for your content. How are you going to answer each of those questions to move them forward? And without that kind of insight, you can know everything else about them, but how are you going to engage them if you don't understand what they need to know, what they're up against, who else they have to convince, those kinds of things. And so understanding what all those questions are, at each stage. And then the thing that I think people miss is once you answer a question and you've given that information, their context changes because they have new insight that helps them say, oh, well, that's really interesting. But now what about this? How does it impact this next thing? Which they wouldn't ask until they had the answer to that first thing. And so your content needs to evolve, and continue to show what's next given what they've just learned. And instead what we tend to do is just throw different versions of the same kind of thing at people, but we're not helping them make progress,
Right.
And so I think that's one of the biggest considerations with personas. When I talk to my clients' customers, I'm continuously asking them, so how did you learn about the company? Well, then what did you do? Well, what happened after that? And trying to figure out how did the thought process work? And then you talk to, sometimes 30 to 50 customers and you say, okay, where are the commonalities across these different people? Because if you hit the commonalities, then those are things that a wider swath of your persona segment are going to care about, right? And your content has more of a chance of being relevant and engaging to more people versus if you say, okay, well, John drives a red Corvette, so let's write about red Corvettes. Well, John may be only one of 10 that drives a red Corvette instead of the 500 that drive a Subaru. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so you want to look for those common things that are going to engage the most of your personas, because unfortunately we still cannot do one-to-one. There's just no way to generate content that's one-to-one from a top of the funnel marketing perspective.
Absolutely. So with that, right, we talked a little bit about sort of their known users and their known customers and answering those questions. Do you look at other things such as what are some common questions from an online perspective, or what are things being asked around that topic that company may create that software in, or other areas of interest such as like I said, SEO type pieces?
Well, yeah, you have to think about context, because if you ask like, what did you search on? People can't tell you. They don't remember. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So things like that, you just have to, what I try to do is get them talking and listen to the words they use, the phrases they use, so that we can create content that is actually relatable to them because it talks like they talk, and so one of the things we tend to do, especially technology companies, is, talk really academically and professionally and highfalutin about our solutions, and use big words, and it makes it harder to read, and I'm sure we've all come across this content where you read the same paragraph 3 times and think, what the heck is this thing saying?
Yeah, especially when it comes to technical companies.
Yeah, and it's hard to write tech content that's easily digestible, but one of the things buyers are saying, and the research has come out recently, is give me messaging I can understand. I don't have a lot of time. Don't make me work at it. Quit making me try to figure it out on my own. When you're giving me content, make it simple so I can get it, and quite often, we get kind of full of ourselves and we want to appear like we're experts and we know everything. And so we use these big words. My example that I use all the time is, and I said this actually, content marketing world, is how many of you have used the word leverage in a piece of content lately, and all these hands go up, and I said, well, why didn't you use the word use? What is there a difference? Did you need to use leverage? Could you just as simply said, use this thing, instead of leverage the data? Why not use the data or whatever, I mean, so it's just simple things like that where we get a little convoluted, but it really slows down the comprehension process when people have to really think about it. And quite often, what are people doing? They're scanning your content. to see if it's, relevant enough that they should slow down and really take a look at it. well, you're going to lose them if they can't instantly kind of ingest what the point is and then say, oh, yeah, I need to learn more about that. And they slow down and actually read it instead of skimming the headers and, subheads and whatever, saying, is this something I want to read?
Right. So it's almost what you're saying is like a tier. It's almost like tiered, right? You have your more basic piece. I'm just going to use basic as the word there. More here's to the point. Here's what it does, or here's what the solution. Here's what the problem is. Here's the solution. And then if you want to get to the more technical piece to drive them further down into it. Correct.
Right.
Is that what you're?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to build up to that. But quite frankly, a lot of times the people who you need to get engaged before the more technical people get involved have no clue about the text. They're not going to learn. They don't care. Somebody else is going to evaluate it and say, yeah, this will mesh with our tech stack or whatever. And you know what I mean? And so you need to talk about the things they care about. And that's where I think a lot of tech companies lose it in translation,
Right.
But there are different levels of, knowledge that people need to have. And that's one of the key things about personas is you learn what is relevant to them, Yeah. But, by the same token, we also have to create content that they can pass along. Sometimes the people that are involved in parts of the decision, you'll never be able to market to directly because they're not in your database. They don't care. And so, once a buyer is interested, they need to be provided with the kind of information that different people need so they can pass it on, and that's something I think we also overlook.
So we talked a little bit about, you mentioned, automation and technology in the marketing world. How do you kind of, in general, see technology changing the marketing landscape in addition to those, previously mentioned automation and things like that?
Oh. Well, right now, what I hear about all the time is AI. And AI is wonderful, but, most of my clients are enterprise, and the probability of them, really embracing and being able to use AI effectively is not in the near term, But other things that I find interesting, I've gotten in several discussions with companies. One time recently, I believe it was Serious Decisions posted on LinkedIn that you no longer need to talk to your customers to build personas because you have data now. So you can use the data to build your persona. So they called it the death of the persona, right? So I went out there and I said, data's great. You can tell what somebody did, but you cannot tell why they did it, what their intent was, if they got value from whatever it is they engaged in, if their question was answered. You have no perspective on any of that. All you know is what they did. You don't know why they did it. So then about a month later, they came out, Serious Decisions again, with this proclamation that predefined nurtures are dead because AI will now assess what your website visitors are interested in and serve up the content that's relevant to them. And I sat there, and you're laughing, see, just like I did, out loud. And I sat there and thought about it, and I thought, that would be just fine and dandy if everybody had the content that AI should serve, given what the person's looking at on your website, but how many companies do? So what exactly is AI going to serve up to them? And so it goes back to that looking for the silver bullet thing, and people are thinking, oh, we got this technology now, it's going to do all this stuff for us. And so the biggest problem I have is that, and I just, is the data and the AI and thinking that it's going to all happen for you. And I just read another report where, marketers said that their biggest problem with using data is that it's all siloed in different systems. And so they can't see it all, they can't weave it all together. So if we're then relying on data that's coming from one system instead of all 10 or however many we have, what is that? What picture is that going to paint for us? And how relevant are we going to be then if we only have a sliver? Is it more dangerous to just know a little than it is to know what the real story is? I just keep wondering how much damage could we do to ourselves if we rely on just a bit of it. And so part of it, I think, is taking technology in stride and learning to work with what it can help you with, but also realizing that the human isn't going away. We have to actually do the work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge.
We find that a lot when working, especially with bigger companies that have a lot of data, even when it is unified, right? Part of the problem is there, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of value you get out of the data, like a lot. But the reality is sometimes even what's being served up and based on that data and what you're looking at and what the user started doing, what we always refer to as their intent, and where they actually got are not really where they wanted to get. And if you're not really looking at that as a human being, right? The AI doesn't, and maybe in the future it will, but it can't really understand it. It understands what's happening and making some, decisions based on that. But based on what that user intent is, they're not even, even search engines don't necessarily always serve up based on how that site indexes and things like that, the actual correct piece of content to the user's actual query, or their question. So.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I have a kind of fun question. I was looking on LinkedIn, and you had posted something about the fake reply, and I immediately, identified. I can't stand when that happens. But I was wondering, it inspired me. What are some of the trends in the industry that are kind of making you cringe, kind of like the fake reply?
Well. Yeah, there's a lot of them, and I've spent a lot of my clients right now are, trying to have marketing work on sales enablement, which is why I'm paying a lot of attention to sales communications and that kind of thing, despite the fact that my inbox is just inundated. But it's, useless stuff. It's like, talk about irrelevant, just moving this to the top of your inbox. Really? I don't care. If it was important to me, I would have responded, but not adding anything else. So then in order for me to figure out what they're moving to the top of my inbox, I have to scroll and read it or go find the first one if I still have it. Chances are no, but it's like, why does that matter? Why do they think people are going to respond to that? My all-time favorite is that stupid email that gets sent out that says, since you haven't responded to me, you must be in one of these 4 buckets. You've been trampled by a hippopotamus. You don't, this isn't the right time or whatever. It gives you the 4 choices, and you're supposed to respond with which one, like that's relevant. But the fake RE was just too much for me. And then when Forrester did it, that was it. That was enough. These people are advising companies and they're doing it. Their salespeople are doing it. And that was just over the top. But it's, a lot of my clients have hired me to work with their BDRs and develop email programs that actually provide value, for their prospects to help them get conversations, and one of the things that I've been kind of struggling with and helping my clients with is that everybody says salespeople need to provide more value. Well, great. What does value mean, right? What's valuable? And so it's taking the personas, once again, going back to the personas and saying, what do they really care about? What perspectives or insights could our sales reps provide that they can't find online? So, for example, if you look at perhaps the thought leadership the company's putting out or whatever and saying, okay, well, what spin would you put on that in a conversation as a salesperson? How would you add value to that piece that they can't get anywhere else? Looking at things like that to, have your salespeople be valuable, because right now buyers don't care. Most of them are saying they can build their short list based on information they can find online without ever talking to them. Well, in the companies I work with, they can't buy the solution without working with a salesperson. But be that as it may, you still have to get on their short list in order to have the conversation. How are you going to do that? What does that take? And so that's really a challenge that marketers are grappling with.
Now, so do you think that's also like the marketers, because they're looking at like, okay, let me get my open rate up, or let me get my click-through rate up, because they're measuring metrics that may not necessarily matter in the context of selling their product, necessarily. Do you think they're being judged on that, or they're being measured on that? So therefore, they're trying to make sure those numbers look better, that they
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because, like I said before, a lot of the teams I'm working with are still being evaluated based on ridiculous things like how many, in quotes, leads did you generate this month? And now what's interesting is a lot of marketers are being mandated to prove contribution to revenue. They have a quota, marketing has to impact sales by adding, 3 million to the pipe every month or whatever it is, right?
Right.
And they have to be able to prove that, which is proving, really challenging. But how are they going to prove that? What are they going to show that proves that? And so they're saying that sales isn't following up on the leads they're giving them because they're still passing names, right, that filled out a form to sales and saying here's a lead, and it's not a lead. Do you know how much research I do for my clients? I'm everybody's best buyer ever, right? Because I download all this stuff. And so, I get pursued relentlessly by people who, if they just bothered to pull me up on LinkedIn and look at me and say, oh, she's a consultant, one person firm. Yeah, let's go after her. She'll buy a $2 million enterprise solution, right?
Right. Yeah. It's so true because, it's interesting too, because a lot of companies look at it very, okay, it's the user performed in action. And you're right. We see this all the time. They're not looking at who the user actually is. Are there, even when they're collecting their job title, like that person may be in HR or in some department that may never buy, but they're still, let me still hit this person up and call them or market to them. They're not just looking at their actions. They're only looking at the actions, not who they are.
Yep. That's true. And, even what surprises me, I'm not surprised that I get inundated with, emails and whatever, but what surprises me is when salespeople actually personally reached out, they haven't even taken the time to look.
Right.
And so it's kind of, the other day, for heaven's sakes, I got an email asking me if I'd ever considered buying an auto franchise through LinkedIn. Right?
Oh,
where my profile is sitting.
Actually, the same thing happened. Last week, I actually filled out a form. I was looking for the owner of a property, someone who had purchased a piece of property from someone else. So I found one of these websites where I could register and pull up that information and find out what the year of the sale was and whatnot. It was a commercial property, so it was not too difficult, but I had to register. And so I registered, and I even selected a reason that was it was pretty clear that I didn't need to purchase the service when I signed up for the free trial. And, the salesman, he called, and, I didn't want to waste his time. Sometimes they wouldn't answer in the past. I was just, I told them, I said, this is why. I'm sorry. You can, you can take me off the list. I'm never going to buy anything. But it was very clear that I was not the person, to really sell to, but they'll call anyway.
Well, and part of that, in all fairness to the salespeople at some point, is that they are quite often, especially inside sales, mandated to call whatever list they're given.
That's true.
So quite often they have to fulfill on what they're told to do. But, it's still, if you're going to have to do that, you should come up with something that's at least semi-relevant to say,
Right.
But, so a lot of it, what we're looking at is traditional sales processes don't necessarily make the leap between being company-focused to being buyer-focused. And so, automating or trying to continue to use outdated processes could be a large part of the problem. And so when you look at what responsibility really does marketing have for driving the messaging sales uses, because it should pass through. One of the other things that are coming up for buyers is that the handoff between marketing and sales is awful, and it's disorienting and frustrating because sales starts over again because they, either don't know what marketing is done or aren't aware of what content that the buyer has read. How is that possible in this day and age where you have marketing automation and CRM and whatever? You should know everything that they've engaged with. But, it's the handoff is what causes a lot of friction in the buying process because they don't care if they're talking to marketing or sales. They're just, looking at the relationship they're having with the company.
Right.
So as we mess that up, we mess up our chances, which is why people are deciding that it's easier to stick with good enough, which is what they have, rather than take the risk of making a change. And that's one of the biggest challenges out there now that we're all fighting against. So, it falls on both marketing and sales to make it worth the effort, and have the payoff be worth it and show them the clear path to getting there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think you're right. I think there's always that defining piece where, it's like up to the sales to understand more about what's going on and what that user has done that they may be calling, especially those inside salespeople, as well as, how the information is being passed from the marketer to make sure they're educated. It's not just about educating your users. Sometimes it's about educating your internal staff that they need to really focus on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, is there anything else you think we should absolutely know, or the audience should absolutely know? Anything pressing, anything on your mind that you'd like to share before we wrap up this awesome conversation?
Well, I don't know. We've covered quite a lot of ground.
I know, quickly too.
Yeah, I just really think that we need to take the time to talk to our customers, and whether you build personas, and make it that formal, or you just take the time to have conversations with, customers. I think it's really important that we get to understand our customers and our buyers better. And, just whatever effort we can put forward in that respect, I think will pay off in the long run with us understanding what makes for better content, what people care about, and I vote for formalized personas that help you actually deliver against strategy. But, that's my bent. But I mean, even if it's just an informal, let me ride along with a salesperson for a day, every month, or let me call 5 customers a month and talk to them, or whatever that may be, or listen to customer service calls, whatever it is. The more we can get to know our audiences, the better off we're going to be from, the perspective of creating relevant content.
Absolutely. Well, Ardath, thank you for joining us today. And if users want to reach out to you, they could go to marketinginteractions.com, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for joining us. Yes, it was a pleasure having you today.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you both so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.